I think there are some ways to give advice well, and then some ways that even though you may have good intentions, the way you do it ends up having it just kind of blow up in your face.
This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, welcome to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. My name is Sam, and I am your host, and I'm joined by Dr. Richard Blackaby.
As always, great to be with you, Sam.
Likewise, Richard. I have some advice for you on this week's episode, and I thought you could maybe give people advice on how to give advice.
Well, I really appreciate that advice. Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day because I was in a setting and it just seemed like there was someone that was just kind of needing some help. They were kind of struggling. They didn't necessarily see things as clearly perhaps as they should, and were struggling a little bit. But it just dawned on me. I remember just kind of thinking, well, am I the person to even do that? And if so, how would I go around and helping that person? Because my natural tendency would just be to just go up and say, "Hey, have you ever thought about this?" But years of experience has taught me that doesn't usually work.
Yeah.
And so it is actually a bit of a science because when you stop and think about it, how many people are struggling in some way or other? How many leaders, people could need some help, whether it's maybe being a parent and they've got a child that is giving them grief, or they're struggling in their marriage right now, or they just struggle in some area of their work. And they desperately could use some help. But why isn't it why don't we just connect more? Why don't we just share knowledge and help each other? And why don't we just go get advice whenever we're at a crossroad? We need some wisdom. It seems like it should be a lot more simple than it is. There's a vast reservoir of wisdom out there, and yet, and oftentimes we're not accessing it for some reason. And if you're like me, there's probably been a time when you tried to help someone out and it didn't go well. It wasn't received well. So, it just made me think: what are some things I've learned about offering advice? And I don't know that I'm an expert in it. I've had some bad experiences where I saw some people who desperately needed advice, but they just were not open to it. And so there's a few things I've learned. There's a couple of verses, maybe in Proverbs especially, that are interesting. I'll just mention a couple, and then I'll kind of lean into a couple of specific things. Proverbs 17:18 says, "Even a fool is considered wise when he keeps silent." And so
I've always loved that verse.
Yeah, and so sometimes there have been times I should have kept silent, and I didn't, and I'm not sure if I ended up looking like a fool or not, but I certainly felt foolish for wishing I'd just not said something. Anyone can appear wise if you're not. I think in part what that's saying is whatever you do know, don't necessarily be just dispersing it continuously. Those kind of folks that whatever it is they have learned or they think they've learned, they're just talking about it all the time. They're just telling everybody, total strangers. And sometimes I think if you want to be the kind of person that people look to for advice, maybe be a little more cautious about how you disperse your wisdom. And it also says the word Proverbs 18:4 says the words of a person's mouth are deep waters, a flowing river, a fountain of wisdom. And of course, that's a beautiful picture of what a person, if you use your mouth correctly, if you speak, there should be deep waters, a flowing river, a fountain of wisdom. And boy, it would be great if all of our listeners were characterized that way, that people all wanted to come and hear what came out of your mouth because there just seemed to be a fountain of wisdom. And then Proverbs 10:21 says, "The lips of the righteous feed many." And again, that's a great verse. I think, as we've kind of seen, though, how to feed many. Sometimes there could be hungry people that don't want to be fed by your words, even though they could use it. Proverbs 11:14 says, "Without guidance, a people will fall, but with many counselors there is deliverance." and we've talked about this before, but just I think all of us need to just build a network of advisors around us, counselors around us, so that we always have access to wisdom, and we don't have to suddenly scramble to try to find somebody that will help us. That we have a network of people that we trust their words and we trust their wisdom. And then one other one, just to mention, I'll come back to Matthew 7, verse 6. It says, "Don't give what is holy to dogs, or toss your pearls before pigs." And I mean, that's a pretty famous verse, but I think it's also a great caution for people that would offer advice. Know your audience. And there's some people that, even though what you have is very precious and valuable and wise, they're just not in a position to value it. They'll trample it. They'll be offended by it. And so don't waste your breath on people that are going to just disrespect or ignore or become upset about the advice that you're offering. So a couple of things just to say on top of that. It's hard to top Proverbs when it comes to that, but one is,
but give it a shot.
Yeah, but anyway, I'll try anyway. And of course, when it comes to giving advice to people, first and foremost, just be someone who's credible. I know some people that are always giving advice, but their own life does not reflect a life of wisdom. If someone in their own life is a disaster, then I mean, even though what they're saying may be perfectly wise and good, you immediately have lost your credibility. And so, you know, I've shared before, but I worked with someone at one point when I was just a newlywed, and she was trying to offer advice, and her comment was, "Hey, if you want advice on marriage, listen to me. I should know. I've been married 5 times." And she thought that being married 5 times made her an expert in marriage. She was, at the time, she was divorced. She divorced all 5 for 5, so she was unmarried at the time. Had experienced 5 failures, but she was trying to tell us that we hadn't been married long, but we were still on our first marriage at that point. And so, you know, there's sometimes, and I've had to, and I feel the same way. There's some things I might have an opinion about some things, but I don't know that my life necessarily, just because of my experience or background or whatever, I'm not an expert in that. I'm not. That's just not an area I necessarily can give a lot of advice on, because I haven't been there, haven't experienced that, haven't maybe given a lot of thought to that. And so kind of know your lane. And the lanes where you ought to be giving advice typically are going to be areas where you've had some mastery, you've had some credibility, you've had some success. And so it just doesn't, I think if you've repeatedly failed in a certain area of your life, even if you want to give advice, you know, we talked about this before, there's sort of almost a culture where having failed at something, people feel like makes them an expert. And I would say, you know, if you've got wayward children and you're going to teach a parenting seminar, I mean, you may have learned what not to do, but that doesn't necessarily make you an expert on what to do. And so kind of know your lane, like where are you credible? That's probably the place, if you're going to offer advice, find that lane and maybe give advice in that area. But and second one, just as I mentioned earlier, just consider your audience. And that's something that, I don't know if I've always done as well as I should, and that is just really take a moment to think about who it is that you're thinking of giving advice to. Where are they at right now? Are they open? Do you have the kind of relationship with them where they would trust you or they would respect you? Is today a day when they'd be more open? You know, they just went through a major crisis in their life, so maybe this isn't the best time. Maybe they just experienced a couple of other disappointments, and so they don't really need that advice you're going to give today. Is just going to seem like more disappointment. It's not going to be seen as a positive word. It's going to be just more negativity. So take time to consider that audience and where are they at today? Is this really the best time right now? I mean, it might be the only time you have. It's either I give advice now or I won't see this person for a year. But other times it's like, you know what, I see this person every week. Maybe as I've been talking a little bit with them today, this doesn't seem like the right time. They're not in the right space. And so to kind of go with that, a third thing would just be don't offer advice when it's not welcome. Have you ever heard people kind of start? Sometimes I've had like total strangers almost. That maybe someone on an airplane saying, "Well, you want some advice?" It's like, and of course you're immediately thinking, "Do I even know this person? Do they appear to be someone that would have advice I'd want to hear? Do they seem credible?"
Yeah.
And there's times where people just they don't welcome advice, and I've just learned, and I think that's what that whole pearls before swine comment is about. If they're not going to value the advice you're giving them, sometimes we just feel like, well, they just need to be told, right? That someone just needs to tell them this, whether they're going to do anything with it or not. But I don't know. I guess in a sense they're going to be accountable now because they have been told the truth, but they weren't in a place to hear it. They didn't want to hear it. They're not going to do anything about it. Of course, the Spirit of God can always take truth and begin to convict them and work it into their life somehow. But I found for the most part that I before I give advice, I want to have some kind of sense of the openness. Are they really open to hearing advice? If not, maybe this isn't the right time.
Yeah.
And maybe a fourth thing just goes with that, just in timing, is, and I've kind of touched on this, but like, what has been happening recently in their life? If they just experienced a major failure in one area of their life, and now you're going to point out another area of shortcoming. It's like, well, you think that's bad, but but hey, you got other issues. How about this one? Is that the time? Like after now, if they've just had, or maybe they've just had some success, and they're basking in the glow of some success, and is that the best time then to kind of rain on their parade? Or maybe, you know what, I think today they just need to have a party and celebrate a success, and maybe we'll come back next time and offer some advice in a different area. But I've just kind of learned that not all days are the same, and not all conversations are equal. There's days when it just seems appropriate to offer some counsel, and other days where you think, I think they perhaps have processed enough. And kind of related to that is just, if you do give advice, try not to give more than they can respond to. And again, I have done that. It's like giving, if I'm selling ice cream cones, hey, you want an ice cream cone, I'll top yours up extra high, and that'll just be a bonus for you. Just you get extra value. And so if I'm going to give you advice, it's like, well, hey, I'm going to give you this advice, but there's 3 or 4 other things I could just add in there as a bonus. I'll supersize your advice here, and
free of charge.
But the problem is people can only process so much, and advice, even when it's well intentioned, can often be painful because it often involves us having to change, and so that's been an area I've not always been great at, is kind of overkill. Just given more, I should have just given it more in bite-sized pieces, and they can chew this up and swallow it and digest it, but if I give them a lot more, it'll just overwhelm them. And so be kind of aware of the kind of bite-sized advice that you want to give, and don't give them a lot more than they can handle in one sitting. And then just develop a relationship. I know people that love to give advice, but they've never earned the relationship to build trust, respect. The people don't know that or think that you love them, but you're always giving them advice. And we've talked about this before too. I've known people, some older adults that they just really wanted to just tell the younger people how to live and how to dress and how to sing and how to do stuff. And they were happy to dispense advice, but the kids had no sense that this person actually cared about them. And so there have been times where I felt like, you know what, I think maybe I might be able to help this person with some things, but I probably just need to spend some time with them. I probably just need to build a relationship first. And that happens with our kids too. And they're our children. Of course we love our kids, but they don't always feel like they're loved by their parents. And sometimes this is probably just more of a relationship building time more than an advice giving time. And I find, especially as your kids get older and they become teenagers, you want to be much more selective. If every time you're around your kid, you're giving them more advice, they'll start avoiding you. So, find a way to kind of intersperse that with times of just relationship and joy, and then now and then some advice along the way. And then also I just say, guard your heart. I've known people that will offer advice, and I've had some experiences even just in the last while where someone will want to offer advice and then they get hurt or offended if people don't accept it. And I've got to, if you're going to give advice, if you're going to get into that line of work, be prepared to not always be well received, or they may listen to you and they just may decide that for them and where they're at, that's just not going to work. That's not going to be helpful. And that's the nature of advice. It's just advice. You're not laying down a command. You're offering advice. And so, but I've known some people that feel almost like their self-worth is at stake if people don't take their advice. I offered them. I really had thought about this, and I was real excited about if they would just do this, and then they chose not to. And they may not be mad at me. They just may feel like, well, Sam, thanks, but like I just don't think that would work in my situation. And so just don't tie your self-worth up with your advice. Mm-hmm. Be prepared to not always, and maybe the person knows you care about them and they like you and they appreciate that, but they just decide not to take that particular advice, and you just got to be prepared to say, listen, I think maybe I just needed to at least give them that option and make that available to them. But hey, then it's up to them. It's their life. They can do with it what they want. And kind of along with that, I would just say watch your motives. Sometimes we can offer advice and it can be kind of self-serving, or we can kind of take pride in the fact that it almost makes us feel superior because we're giving advice to someone else. And so, hey, I'm kind of mentoring this person. I'm giving them advice. This is people give that maybe they give advice to the pastor, and then the pastor, if they accept some of the advice, it's like, yeah, I'm kind of, helping the pastor know how to run the church. And he I often kind of give him suggestions on how he could do things better. And so sometimes our motives are not necessarily the best in why we're even giving advice. Sometimes giving advice is more about meeting a need we have instead of meeting a need someone else has. And so just be watching for that. And then just maybe a couple last, maybe 2-3 last things. If you're going to give advice, there's often a negative way to give it and then a positive way to give it. And I would say, take a moment to ask yourself, what would be a positive, affirming way to give this advice? Of course, you can say you can give advice in a way that's belittling, humiliating. It's like, hey, looks like you kind of messed up again. Here's some advice. Or to say, I'm really excited about your enthusiasm and passion. It's obvious you really love what you're doing, and it's so nice to see someone that's just really having a good time working here. Listen, I got a suggestion. Just bounce off. You see what you think. And it's like there's a positive way to sort of surround some advice, and then there's a negative way. And obviously, when you present things in a positive way, they're just much higher likelihood of it being received and accepted. And then also, I would just say, if you're going to offer advice, as best you can, try to offer some practical steps. It's one thing to just say, hey, you just need to be more positive, or you need to be more this, or you need to be more that. But, well, how would I do that? What could I do? And I think it's always helpful to say, well, let me give you a couple ideas. Just think about some of these ways. You have to do everything this way, but I'm just kind of brainstorming with you here some ways maybe you could do that. Have you ever tried this? Have you ever thought about that? And, of course, they can kind of pick and choose what they might do, but sometimes we can give advice that's so general that now people know that maybe they're not doing things well, but they don't necessarily know how to do it any differently.
Yeah, it's not actually helpful advice.
Yeah, so give some steps, give some way. Here's an example. Let me illustrate what I'm talking about. And then now they got a handle. They can grab hold of that and they can try it perhaps. And then the last one is just do your homework. If you're seeing something that maybe you're aware of something that could be helpful to someone, do your homework on the person. Find out, are they in a place to receive advice? Am I in a relationship with them that I think I'd be a good person to offer it? Is this good timing? And then homework about what you're offering them. Do I really know my stuff? Would this really be best for them? What is there a software program? Is there a seminar they could go to? Is there a YouTube I could send them? Is there a book I could put in their hands? If I'm going to offer some advice, do I know my stuff? Have I kind of done my homework? So if they ask some questions and follow up, I'm prepared to really be a wise counselor to them. Or is this just a real surface drive-by kind of piece of advice? Hey, you need to learn how to run better meetings, and that's it. There's my advice. No, here's a book that's great on running meetings, and here's a YouTube that it's funny, but it's really helpful, and here's something else, and here's 3 things I've learned in running meetings that have really helped streamline them, make them more effective, and so you've kind of thought about it, what you're going to do before you actually approach them and offer some advice. So lots to say about that. Not everybody can really do that and pull that off. I'm not necessarily saying you need to be just every day going out looking for someone you can give advice to. But there may be times when you will cross paths with someone that just clearly is struggling, and they don't necessarily have a wise counselor in their life that can offer some feedback and help them. And maybe that will be God's invitation for you. But if so, I think there are some ways to give advice well, and then some ways that even though you may have good intentions, the way you do it ends up having it just kind of blow up in your face. And so a while ago, it struck me just observing some things, and it just made me realize I think that we could all probably do better at giving advice, and there's a lot of people who could use some good advice if you give it in the right way at the right time. And so perhaps for our listeners in the days to come, God might just cross your path with someone who needs some good, loving, helpful counsel, and you'll be the exact person that God uses to help someone out along the way.
Well, great. And I think with that, my advice to you, Richard, is to lay off the puns.
Well, I'll take that into consideration.
Good. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.